Hello, I'm Bernard Lewis. I will be your instructor for English 243 online. This course is titled Literary Masterpieces, Fantasy, Myth, and Legend. If you Google a definition for fantasy, Google will return 37,300,000 results in 0.41 seconds. This speaks to the importance and the preoccupation that we have with fantasy. We'll be talking about the nature of fantasy. Why do we need fantasy? Think about that. Why do you think we need fantasy? Why do we need to get outside reality? We'll be looking at fantasy along with myth and legend. Fantasy differs from legend, for example, in that it is, at least theoretically, impossible, whereas legend is possible but unsubstantiated. Myth is, depending on what you believe, possible, impossible, involving supernatural things. In its simplest form, the word myth just means a body of belief, whether it's religious belief or otherwise. Fantasy can be defined as the faculty or activity of imagining things, especially things that are impossible or at least improbable. Some of the fantasies that we'll be looking at will be fairy tales. You may think you understand all about Little Red Riding Hood, that it's just a simple children's story. However, after you read the introduction that I'm going to have posted in your book, How to Read a Fairy Tale, you may discover that Little Red Riding Hood has a lot more going on than you thought. Cinderella may have a lot more going on than you thought, too. We'll be looking at a number of versions of Cinderella from different countries in the world. Here's a picture of Little Red Riding Hood with the wolf, and boy, is she surprised. And of course, here's the glass slipper, as I'm sure you recognize. Fantasies also include things like Alice in Wonderland. In the introduction to the 150th anniversary edition of the annotated Alice, Martin Gardner refers to the stories as a very curious, complicated kind of nonsense written for British readers of another century. Indeed, a book written in 2016 might seem like nonsense to a reader of Lewis Carroll's time. Nevertheless, even without understanding the inside jokes that belong particularly to the 19th century England, we continue to delight in Alice's adventures. We're going to be reading it. We're going to be watching the movie with Johnny Depp. And here's a picture of the wonderful Cheshire Cat with Alice. We'll talk a little about where Lewis Carroll got the idea of the Cheshire Cat later. In London, there is a restaurant called the Cheshire Cheese, and it has a smile, a hole in it that's in the shape of a smile, so you eat everything but the smile. A legend is a traditional story that might actually be possible, but that is really unauthenticated. If you Google a definition for legend, you get 77 million results in 0.30 seconds. A legend can include things like King Arthur, and we'll be looking at Arthurian legend through Mallory's Morte Arthur. We'll also be looking at modern Camelot legends like the White House. King Arthur had a round table in Camelot where everything was idealized. In the 60s, America wanted to idealize things through Camelot by looking at the Kennedy family. Everything seemed ideal there. Fantasies also involved stories like vampires. We're going to be reading Anne Rice's interview with the vampire. Why are we so fascinated with vampires? We'll think about that as we move along. Here's Brad Pitt as Louis de Pontdulac in Interview with the Vampire. Here is a picture of Nosferatu, the beginning of the vampire movie. Long way. The vampires come a long way. This certainly does not look like a sex symbol in any way. Here's a picture of Bela Lugosi, who came to the United States from his native Hungary. When he came to the United States, he could barely speak English. He memorized his lines without really understanding all of them. And the very famous "good evening" has nothing to do with anything except his Hungarian accent. This is a picture of Dracula from Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula, which included this very bizarre hairdo. I'm not sure what that was about. I don't think this is what the Victorian Stoker would have envisioned. And here's George Hamilton IV, who became the sexy man about town, who could even tango. And Stephanie Myers has evolved the bloodsuckers so that they now glitter in the sunlight. Here's Robert Pattinson, moved on from Harry Potter to Twilight. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, but this is an absolutely brilliant TV series that's on the CW called The Originals. It's actually a spin-off from another show, but it's about the conflict between the witches, werewolves, and vampires in New Orleans, and they're all supposed to be originals. It's a very interesting show. Here's True Blood, and some of you may have watched this. It's a very different kind of vampire show again. A myth, in its simplest form, just means a body of belief. If you Google it, you will get 61,600,000 results in 0.32 seconds. It is defined here as a traditional story, especially one concerning the early history of a people or explaining some natural or social phenomenon, and typically involving supernatural beings or events. We're going to do something interesting. We're going to read a myth, a classical myth, retold as a fairy tale in the form of C.S. Lewis's novel Till We Have Faces. I think you'll enjoy it. It's really a neat story. Here's a picture, an artist's conception of Cupid and Psyche, the basis of the myth. For background, we'll be reading the creation and fall of man from the early chapters of Genesis. This will be background for Frankenstein and for Christopher Marlowe's Faustus. We'll also read some short sections from John Milton's Paradise Lost as background for Shelley's Frankenstein. Should never trust a talking snake, not even in the Garden of Eden. Here is certainly the story, the myth, the legend, whatever you want to call it, of Lucifer being thrown out of heaven, falling onto the fire. Returning to fantasy, we're going to read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Certainly when it was written and published, it was fantasy. However, it's becoming more real year by year. Do you think so? Are we piecing together bodies and doing transplants? Are we reanimating tissue? Who knows what with the sheep dolly and the cloning and so forth that's going on. It's hard to imagine what Mary Shelley and her compatriots may have thought of that. We're also going to read the tragical history of Dr. Faustus. It is fantasy, but how many people real people have lived out this story of hubris, making a deal with the devil, so to speak? There are more ways than one to do that, you know. Here's a picture of the original Frankenstein picture with the old blind man lighting his pipe, and he's afraid of the fire, of course. Here's a woodcut of Faustus making a bargain with Mephistopheles to sell his soul to the devil. Finally, we're going to read George Orwell's novel 1984, and it is literally fantasy becoming reality. When Orwell published his novel in 1948, Big Brother was sheer fantasy, but not anymore. He's very real, and he is definitely watching you. When Orwell wrote the novel in 1984, no one ever envisioned a computer such as you are looking at right now, that you could see me and I could see you, or someone could see. I can't see you, obviously, but it is possible for somebody to find you through your webcam. It happens. I have been browsing and had a message pop up and say, "Do I have permission to look at to see you through your webcam?" Very bizarre. I would advise you to click those things and not look at them. Who knows what's out there? This is a picture from the movie 1984, a picture of Big Brother, who you'll have to decide for yourself if he really existed or not. If you think Big Brother is not watching you, you might want to take a look when you come to the next red light. The red lights are. This is a picture from an ATM camera. This is a surveillance camera in a convenience store capturing a robbery. Some of my friends have actually seen this little Google Maps Street View vehicle going by their house. You might take a look. Here's a beach scene, and if you zoom in, it could get very personal. I'll be looking forward to working with you this semester. Take a look at the Canvas course, the document for course information. The textbooks is up on Canvas. Most of Canvas is built in there. I'll be adding links to songs, links to videos and movies as we go along. You need to try to keep up. It's a good bit of reading, but very rewarding. This class gets really good reviews. It's one that works well online because almost everybody who takes it is really invested in the literature and they really want to do it. So I look forward to working with you, and remember that you'll need to be able to film yourself. You'll need a webcam, you'll need a microphone. I'll be asking you to respond on video to some things on quizzes, maybe discussions, certainly on exams. So be sure your technology is in order. Be sure to read the course information document very closely in its entirety. Thank you.